When most people think of animation, they probably think of Disney, and more specifically, medieval fantasy-like stories. They might think of princesses, dragons, kings, characters like Robin Hood or Merlin. But there is no doubt that most of the most popular types of animation have been inspired by medieval fantasy. We have had parodies of that fairy tale medieval period with films like Shrek, but we have never gotten anything that has truly pushed the boundary forward of what is possible with that type of genre. Instead, most studios now just do foreign countries in the past or modern day. Although I do love the films of the foreign countries like Kung Fu Panda, Moana, or Encanto, the modern day stories are getting boring, and there's no doubt about that. Now, I've already talked about reaching out and doing more types of movies with animation, but how do we save these fairy tale esque stories? Well, I was looking for the right solution for a long time, but last Friday, a movie which fit the call perfectly showed up, and it was also just an amazing movie. Netflix's newest animated movie is not only probably my second favorite animated film of the year, there's no being Spider-Verse, but also it's a perfect guide on how to continue fairy tale animated films. The film is called Nimona, and before we should start, I should mention that Nimona was a graphic novel adaptation, so the story was not created for animation, but with how well it works, that's why we're covering it today. Now, Nimona gets a lot of things right. It's basically just mixing modern times with medieval times. It does modern commentary, but uses a fantasy world to do it. One thing that can be annoying with those classic Disney films is just how idealized they are. It isn't a bad thing for the era, not a bad thing in general, but now the world feels so much more complicated and less perfect that these overly idealized worlds don't really fit. Shrek was a step in the right direction, but they didn't have much to say instead of just parodying Disney. Nimona is using the fantasy world to comment on systematic oppression and also the themes about being yourself. It takes a modern problem and instead of having it be all metaphorical and take place in some city, like a lot of Disney films nowadays do, they give that societal problem a face with a villain and turns it into this fantasy story once more. The film also gives the villain better than any Disney once Instructor Facilier back in 2009. It gets a twist villain done right as well, and it does include a villain. The villain here doesn't stand up to the best of Disney's past, but she was very solid, and I really enjoyed her. But that whole idea of giving your criticism, the thing that you're criticizing with a story, a face, that idea works so well and isn't something I've really seen done before in animation. Looking back, most Disney villains were just greedy and not the opposition to the story's morals. But in these modern times, if we want to continue to make fantasy stories, that is a perfect way to move on, ensuring that we still have villains and giving them even more importance to the story. The final thing relating to Nimona is how it mixes fantasy and then the modern day. The location where the story takes place is a mix between a kingdom and city. It takes a modern day and mixes it with fantasy. There's no guns, but there are magic lasers and, of course, crossbows. I feel this was not my favorite thing execution wise. I don't think flying cars add anything to the story, which you can intrigue with dragons and horses, but it looks good and the idea is very solid. Cameras and television screens are very important to the story around the middle part in a way that cannot be substituted for anything in medieval times. To do this story, to do this right of mixing real day and the past, I think Legend of Korra is a perfect example, but that is a video for another day. But how they do it there, perfect. So, how can we apply what we just covered to the future animated projects from various studios? I think the answer is very simple. Don't be simple. The thing that made Nimona work is taking a generic trope, which we all know and seen done before, and turning it into a commentary with a big, potent lesson behind it. The film made queer characters in medieval times actually work in a way where we care about, unlike some other new projects that no longer exist. Cough, cough, Willow series. It isn't just putting a new spin on old stories. It is using a simpler time for a more complex story. In my opinion, Nimona is more of a fantasy story than most Disney classics. To me, a good fantasy uses a simpler tone and from there expands to a message or world building. One of my favorite examples is Once and Future King. That is what Nimona is so good at. It takes the basic fantasy story of knights killing evil knights and killing monsters and takes a look of what that really means on a societal level and how that affects the people who are being beaten down. If you take that meaning of fantasy and then apply it to writing future stories, it can work anywhere. It could work in feudal Japan, in indigenous tribes. It could even take place during events like the bubonic plague or the Salem witch hunts. It doesn't matter where it is, as long as the society and the era have something to say and it's a simple-ish time. You do need to be meaningful about where you choose. In Kanto, you could pretty much have that take place anywhere. It's just a big family. But Nimona can't. Now, Nimona shouldn't be your template. If you choose to make a movie during the bubonic plague, for example, you don't need to have the plague be a character like Thanos. It's the face of all the evil, because that would not work. But you could use that time period of chaos and have people start killing people who think that they are the cause, they brought the plague from wherever, and have the protagonist, maybe it's someone who is being hunted because the people suspect that her family accidentally brought the plague to this town or whatever. So in that story, you could learn that mass hating people for other reasons is a bad thing. That's probably a horrible example, but that is to say, Nimona is an example of how to do this new fantasy right, instead of being a model on how to do it to be copied. I truly hope Nimona gets attention, because although Spider-Verse is amazing, and probably better, at least by a little bit, Nimona should be a beacon at representing what classic fairy tale animation should be moving forward. One last thing, which I find extremely ironic, Disney scrapped this movie. It was originally to be made by Blue Sky Animation, but when Disney bought Fox, they shut all future projects down, including Nimona, and now Nimona is better than almost all the past Disney films of this century. There's still good ones, but Nimona, again, it's really good. Anyways, though, that's all I have to say. What do you think? Do you like my idea of this new fantasy? I mean, I'm planning on doing a video on once the future came soon, so I'll talk about it more there. Have you seen Nimona? What do you think? I'm planning on doing a more in-depth video covering Nimona soon, so make sure to stay tuned for that. I'm also planning on doing a Spider-Verse video. The film's been out for a month as the day I'm filming. I gotta do something. I recently discussed why we need animation diversity, but not just 3D animation. If you want to see why that is, make sure to check out this video on the screen now. Subscribe for future videos on animation, like I mentioned, Nimona, Spider-Verse, and also Avatar The Last Airbender, and plenty of others. Thanks for watching. I've been Fictional Fanatics. Once again, I will see you in the next video, so until then, bye!